He was the king of custom motorcycles, a grease-stained outlaw who turned raw metal into rolling art. Jesse James built an empire from scratch, became a TV star with Monster Garage, and even married Hollywood royalty, Sandra Bullock. But behind the tattoos and tough guy image was a storm waiting to erupt. Affairs, meltdowns, a Nazi photo scandal, and the complete collapse of his empire would follow. America once saw him as a rebel genius, but what he became was something far darker. In just a few years, Jesse James went from icon to outcast, dragging his career, marriage, and reputation down in flames. What caused the downfall? Was it the pressure of fame, or a self-destructive streak that finally caught up to him? This is the rise and fall of Jesse James, and what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Before the scandal, the celebrity marriages, and the tabloid implosions, Jesse James was just a kid with a welding torch and a dream. Born in Long Beach, California in 1969, Jesse grew up obsessed with motorcycles, metal, and machinery. Raised primarily by his father, a former antique dealer, Jesse found solace in tools and engines, not textbooks or social norms. His early life was rough, plagued by instability, anger issues, and fights. But those very struggles forged the tough, no-nonsense persona he would later become known for. Jesse's path to fame didn't begin in front of a camera. It began in a small garage where he built custom bikes for clients who valued raw craftsmanship over polish. He named his brand West Coast Choppers, and it quickly became synonymous with high performance, aggressive design, and attitude. His bikes were loud, dangerous, and built for people who lived on the edge, much like Jesse himself.
7 weeks ago, he vowed to build a chrome monster and ride it non-stop from California to South Dakota.
In the 90s, word began to spread. Celebrities, athletes, and musicians wanted his creations. Each bike was unique, built by hand, and stamped with Jesse's now iconic Iron Cross logo. What set Jesse apart wasn't just his technical skill, it was his authenticity. While other custom shops chased polish and perfection, Jesse stayed gritty and unapologetically real. He brought a punk rock mentality to the world of chrome and horsepower. His tattoos, his welding mask, his brash attitude. It wasn't an act, it was Jesse. And that resonated with a generation that was growing tired of plastic, corporate cool. By the late 90s, West Coast Choppers had exploded. T-shirts, merchandise, and even branded energy drinks hit shelves. But the core of the business remained in custom bikes. Machines that looked like Mad Max fever dreams come to life. Jesse wasn't just building motorcycles, he was building a myth. This was the golden era of Jesse James, a self-made fabricator turned underground icon. No scandals, no cameras, just a man, his torch, and the roar of an engine. But that roaring success would soon catch Hollywood's attention. And once the spotlight found Jesse, everything started to change. Jesse James didn't seek fame, it found him. By the early 2000s, the custom motorcycle world was exploding in popularity, and cable networks were hungry for new reality content. Discovery Channel saw something magnetic in Jesse. His rebellious energy, raw talent, and the intensity that burned through every weld he laid. They pitched a documentary-style special, Motorcycle Mania, in 2000. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural moment. Motorcycle Mania introduced the world to Jesse's world. The sweat, the sparks, the rage, and the artistry behind custom bikes. Audiences were instantly hooked. Jesse wasn't just a builder, he was a character. He swore, he yelled, he obsessed over every detail, and most importantly, he lived the part. He wasn't pretending to be a badass, he was one. He made welding look like an art form, and destruction seem poetic. The success of that special led to the launch of Monster Garage in 2002, a show that turned ordinary vehicles into insane, Frankenstein-like creations under impossible deadlines. Jesse, now the host and leader, became the face of industrial rebellion. Whether it was turning a PT Cruiser into a wood chipper or a Mustang into a lawnmower, the builds were insane, and viewers couldn't get enough. Jesse brought together misfit crews, clashed with egos, and made magic, or chaos, on screen. The show wasn't just about cars, it was about attitude. Jesse came off like a modern-day pirate, fearless, foul-mouthed, and somehow always in control. Monster Garage ran for 5 seasons and solidified Jesse's place in pop culture. He wasn't just building bikes anymore. He was building an empire. But with fame came pressure, and with pressure came exposure. The man who once thrived in solitude was now constantly surrounded by cameras, producers, and expectations. And though the world was watching Jesse James rise, the seeds of his downfall were quietly being planted behind the scenes. Jesse James was already a household name in gearhead circles, but his fame exploded when he began dating and eventually married Academy Award-winning actress Sandra Bullock. It was the unlikeliest pairing imaginable: the gruff, tatted-up biker and America's sweetheart. Their relationship seemed like a Hollywood oddity, but fans were fascinated. How could someone as polished and graceful as Sandra fall for someone so raw and unpredictable? The two met when Sandra arranged for her godson to visit Jesse's garage. Sparks flew, and in 2005, they were married. Suddenly, Jesse was catapulted from Discovery Channel stardom to tabloid royalty. Red carpets, award shows, paparazzi. It was a far cry from the world of welding torches and grease-stained jeans. At first, Jesse seemed to embrace the new life. His brand expanded. His name appeared next to high-end merchandise, sponsorships, and TV deals. West Coast Choppers evolved from a gritty custom shop to a globally recognized lifestyle brand. The outlaw had made it, but something shifted. The deeper he sank into Hollywood, the more he seemed to lose control of his narrative. He wasn't just Jesse the Builder anymore, he was Sandra Bullock's husband. To many, he was the blue-collar accessory to her polished career. Behind closed doors, Jesse reportedly bristled at the role. The fame he once enjoyed now felt hollow, intrusive. The cameras that once celebrated his genius now dissected his every move. Friends and employees noticed changes. He became more withdrawn, more irritable. The shop, once the heart of his world, no longer had the same spark. Jesse, it seemed, was caught between two identities: the rebel builder and the celebrity spouse. And that identity crisis would soon rip everything apart. While Jesse James was gracing red carpets and rubbing shoulders with A-listers, trouble was brewing behind the chrome and flash. West Coast Choppers, the empire he'd built from scratch, was beginning to stall. What had once been a symbol of raw creativity and rebellion was now weighed down by commercial bloat and growing disinterest. The custom chopper boom was fading, and so was Jesse's grip on the machine he created. Inside the shop, longtime employees began to leave. Some cited burnout. Others said Jesse had changed. "He wasn't the same guy," one former fabricator noted. "He was distracted, moody, checked out." Rumors swirled of missed deadlines, frustrated clients, and screaming matches behind closed doors. The same perfectionism that once fueled Jesse's brilliance was now turning toxic. Financially, things weren't looking great either. Merch sales dropped. The hype around Monster Garage cooled. And while Jesse remained a name, the business was no longer booming. Behind the scenes, Jesse was allegedly juggling a chaotic blend of fame, failing relationships, and internal unrest within his companies. Publicly, Jesse still projected confidence, but cracks were showing. Interviews became testy. He walked out on reporters. In one infamous moment, he lashed out at a camera crew for following him at a gas station.
Hey, how's it going?
Go.
We're in public property, bro. We're in public property.
He wants to leave, and I'm gonna call the cops.
You're a public figure.
The image of the cool outlaw was crumbling, revealing someone exhausted, cornered, and increasingly unstable. The pressure cooker was about to explode. Jesse's carefully balanced world, part fame, part fabrication, was teetering. And when it collapsed, it wouldn't just be a fall from grace. It would be one of the most scandalous implosions in recent pop culture memory. In 2010, Jesse James wasn't just famous, he was everywhere. He had a thriving brand, a hit TV career, and a Hollywood marriage to one of the most beloved actresses on the planet. Then, in a matter of days, it all came crashing down. A woman named Michelle Bombshell McGee came forward with allegations that she had been having an affair with Jesse, while he was still married to Sandra Bullock. The floodgates opened. More women came forward. Each new headline was more damning than the last. The betrayal stunned the public. Sandra had just won an Oscar for The Blind Side, and the world was celebrating her as a national treasure. Meanwhile, Jesse was exposed as a serial cheater, leading a double life. The press devoured the story. Tabloids ran daily updates. The media painted Jesse as a selfish, arrogant hypocrite who had destroyed his own fairy tale. Jesse issued a public apology, calling the affair the biggest mistake of my life. He checked into rehab for sex addiction, an attempt at damage control, but the public wasn't buying it. The contrast between Sandra's grace and Jesse's chaos was too jarring. America had made up its mind. Jesse James was no longer the cool outlaw. He was a fraud. Sandra filed for divorce just weeks after the scandal broke. She adopted her son alone and retreated from the public eye, hailed as a woman of strength. Jesse, on the other hand, was vilified. Endorsement deals evaporated. TV opportunities dried up. West Coast Chopper's image took a serious hit. The damage wasn't just personal. It was professional, permanent, and total. What made the scandal so devastating wasn't just the affair. It was the timing, the hypocrisy, and the sheer scale of the deception. Jesse had torched everything he built, and this time, there was no one else to blame. Just when it seemed Jesse James couldn't fall any further, the unthinkable happened. In the wake of his cheating scandal, a photograph leaked that would send shockwaves through both his fan base and the wider public. In the photo, Jesse posed in full Nazi regalia, arm raised in a Hitler salute, grinning in front of a mirror. The image was grotesque, jarring, and impossible to explain away. Public outrage erupted. What was initially seen as a case of personal moral failure now became something far darker and more offensive. Celebrities, media figures, and former supporters publicly condemned him. Jewish organizations demanded an apology. Sponsors ran for the exits. Jesse's brand, already crumbling, now appeared radioactive. Jesse's defense? He claimed it was meant to be a private joke taken out of context, but the explanation didn't land.
It was a joke. I mean, it was obviously done at my house, and it was done a decade ago. You know, I think whatever magazine ran that, they made it sound like it was taken that week.
The visual alone was too inflammatory, the timing too damning. In an era where public image could be obliterated overnight, this was the final nail. He wasn't just the guy who cheated on Sandra Bullock anymore. He was a pariah, The Nazi photo redefined Jesse's public persona. It painted him not just as reckless or unfaithful, but offensive and ignorant. Overnight, any lingering sympathy he might have retained vanished. His TV shows were canceled or postponed. West Coast Choppers was quietly closed. His once loyal fan base fractured. Jesse, who had built his empire on image and attitude, watched both be destroyed in one devastating blow. Behind the scenes, Jesse reportedly spiraled. Friends noted that he became more reclusive and paranoid. Media appearances stopped. Even his attempts to explain the photo were quickly shut down. It wasn't just a PR disaster. It was a cultural erasure. With nothing left in California but burned bridges, Jesse packed up and left LA, hoping to rebuild in the shadows. But the fall had already happened. The man who once ruled reality TV was now a ghost of his former self. In the aftermath of the scandals, Jesse James vanished from Hollywood almost entirely. The spotlight that once loved him had turned toxic, and Jesse seemed to understand that he couldn't stay in California, not with the public glare, the media hounding, and the wreckage of his life all around him. He sold his home, shuttered West Coast Choppers, and disappeared into self-imposed exile in Austin, Texas. There, Jesse tried to rebuild, personally, professionally, and emotionally. But his attempts at redemption often backfired. He starred in a short-lived show called Jesse James is a Dead Man, which aimed to show a grittier, introspective side. The show failed to connect. The public simply wasn't ready or willing to forgive. He also announced plans to relaunch Monster Garage, a move that puzzled fans and critics alike. The reboot struggled with low ratings and lacked the energy that once made the original iconic. Jesse's spark seemed dulled. The world had moved on, and so had the genre he helped create. His larger-than-life persona, once a draw, now felt like a relic of a different time. In Texas, Jesse opened Austin Speed Shop, and later Jesse James Firearms Unlimited, pivoting from bikes to cars and custom-built guns. The ventures kept him busy, but largely out of the spotlight. He married drag racer Alexis DeJoria in 2013, another attempt at starting fresh. But even that chapter would eventually collapse into divorce. Online, Jesse remained combative. He lashed out at critics, posted political rants, and stirred controversy with inflammatory social media posts. Rather than softening his image, he seemed to double down on the very qualities that had led to his downfall. His time in exile wasn't a quiet redemption arc. It was a slow, stubborn unraveling. He had traded in the streets of LA for the backroads of Texas, but the wreckage still followed him. Jesse wasn't just rebuilding, he was surviving. And even that was proving harder than he thought. By the mid-2010s, Jesse James had fully relocated to Texas, far from the limelight of Los Angeles and the media circus that once engulfed his life. With West Coast Choppers officially closed, Jesse leaned into his new businesses, Austin Speed Shop and Jesse James Firearms Unlimited. The shift from custom bikes to classic cars and handcrafted firearms seemed to signal a new chapter, quieter, more focused, and perhaps redemptive. In 2013, Jesse married Alexis DeJoria, a successful NHRA drag racer and daughter of billionaire John Paul DeJoria. On paper, it looked like stability had finally arrived. He built a home in Dripping Springs, immersed himself in metalwork, and gave interviews suggesting he had changed.
She's just like a real woman, you know, like a real, I don't want to say anything to jinx it, but it's pretty good. She's the first person I've ever been with that's like, just lets me work and thinks it's awesome. Like, what are you making? Oh, that's cool. Everybody else I've been with is like, oh, when are you gonna be done?
"I'm just a man," he told Daily Mail in 2017. "I screwed up. I've done the work. I've paid the price. But beneath the surface, familiar patterns were re-emerging. The marriage, praised at first for being more balanced than his chaotic past relationships, eventually unraveled. By 2020, Jesse and Alexis announced their separation, his fifth divorce. Around the same time, lawsuits were filed against Jesse's companies, alleging breach of contract and mismanagement. Critics and former employees described a hostile work environment echoing the same issues that plagued his past ventures. Social media didn't help. Jesse continued to share inflammatory posts, politically charged rants, gun advocacy, and tone-deaf commentary. The same unfiltered persona that once made him a star now alienated potential customers and collaborators. Redemption, it seemed, wasn't something Jesse was chasing. He was doubling down on defiance. Professionally, Jesse retained a niche fan base. His firearms business found success in certain circles, and custom car collectors still admired his fabrication skills. But his mainstream relevance was gone. He wasn't reinventing himself. He was insulating himself, building a world where he didn't have to answer to anyone. The Jesse James of Texas wasn't that different from the Jesse James of LA. He just had fewer people watching. As the years passed, the question surrounding Jesse James wasn't whether he'd return to fame, but whether he should. In 2021, Discovery announced a Monster Garage reboot, banking on nostalgia to revive interest in the once iconic series. Jesse returned to the screen, welding goggles on, sleeves rolled up, and a familiar growl in his voice. But something was different, and the audience noticed. Gone was the hungry outlaw with a point to prove. What viewers saw now was a man weathered by life, less explosive, more subdued. The projects were still ambitious, the metal still roared, but the spark wasn't the same. Jesse seemed caught between two versions of himself, trying to recapture the old magic while keeping the demons at bay. Critics called the reboot uninspired, and ratings reflected that the world had moved on. Off camera, Jesse continued to push the narrative that he'd changed. In rare interviews, he acknowledged his past mistakes, spoke about therapy, and claimed to be more grounded. But just as quickly, he would post something controversial or launch into an online tirade, undoing any goodwill he'd tried to rebuild. The public remained divided. Was Jesse a misunderstood genius who got chewed up by fame, or a deeply flawed man who never took accountability? Among gearheads and purists, Jesse's fabrication skills were still respected. His work, especially in the early 2000s, remained a benchmark of craftsmanship, but his legacy was now permanently tangled with scandal. Younger fans didn't know him as the king of Monster Garage. They knew him as the guy who blew it all up. In the end, Jesse James never fully reinvented himself. He never became the comeback kid or the reformed celebrity. Instead, he carved out a life on the fringes, still building, still welding, still defiant. In the end, the rise and fall of Jesse James isn't just about motorcycles or fame, it's about identity. It's about a man who built everything with his hands, but couldn't hold on to what mattered most. Fame didn't destroy Jesse James. He did that all on his own. And somewhere in Texas, behind a wall of steel and smoke, he's still building. Maybe not for the world, but just to remind himself he still can.